Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good As Gold Australia, and today once again joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good As Gold. And today we interview John Adams, Chief Economist at As Good As Gold Australia. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Darryl and Brian.
Good afternoon.
John, we've entered, 2019 has passed, 2020 is underway, and we've been looking forward to this. It looks as though there's a number of changes that are going to take place. A lot of the things we've been talking about in 2019 will be supported very early, I believe, in 2020. But with all of that, we believe there's going to be some major announcements made. One we believe that will be coming up very shortly from yourself. You have a rather big announcement to make. Is that correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. So I think one of the big issues, this is going back way back into 2019, and for Australians in particular, over the last 6 months, including our customers, Good as Gold Australia, has been the proposal by the Morrison government to make it illegal to conduct cash transactions above $10,000. Major ramifications come from this proposal, of course, that is if it's passed. You've been speaking a lot about this proposal on various platforms, that being As Good as Gold Australia and with Martin North, of course. And I know that you've got a major announcement to make regarding this law currently before Parliament. Now, before we get to the announcement, however, can we briefly explain, or could you briefly explain to our viewers the name of this proposed law, what the law would outlaw, and what penalties may be associated with that law? So there's a basket of questions there, but if you could provide us with those answers, that would be very much appreciated, John.
Thank you, Darryl. Yeah, so obviously a lot of our viewers would be across this issue around banning cash transactions, but particularly for potential new viewers or some of our overseas viewers, I think it's important that we just tell people what's going on. So kind of like you said, the government is trying to ban cash transactions at or above $10,000. The proposed law, it's called the Currency Restrictions on the Use of Cash Bill 2019. So what it would say is that if the law is passed by Parliament and is currently before a Senate inquiry at the moment, so if the law passes, it would be illegal to engage in a transaction, in terms of whether the transaction was at 10,000 or above, where you are either receiving or paying $10,000. So there are a few exemptions to the law, but basically, if it's business to business or individual to business, that would be illegal. The penalties under the maximum penalties under the law, under the proposed law, as currently before Parliament, would be 2 years in jail and a fine of up to $25,200. So these are massive, significant penalties. These sort of laws do exist in Europe, in particular. In a number of European countries, the threshold is a lot lower than $10,000. So Italy, it's €1,000. France is €1,000. Spain, €2,500. Greece, €500. Now, the penalty in Europe, if you conduct these cash transactions, is a fine, and the fine is a percentage of the transaction. So these fines are relatively smallish, but you still have to pay something to the government. So it's a big step for the Australian government to say, if you engage in one of these transactions, you potentially could go to jail for quite a while. I mean, 2 years for just doing a transaction using legal tender. I mean, I find it an outrage, so the law would have huge ramifications right across Australia. Would obviously have ramifications for us in terms of As Good as Gold. We do have clients from time to time that want to deal with us in cash, but there's a whole host of unintended consequences which to date have come about. Let me give a couple. One is in terms of the funeral sector. The funeral industry have pretty much up in arms against this law. A lot of Australians, from all sorts of backgrounds, tend to pay for funerals using cash. Sometimes those funerals cost more than $10,000. There's some of the testimony from the funeral industry is that once someone has passed away, a family is quite upset. They're grieving. They may have cash at home. They have the ability to pay for the funeral in cash. The last thing they want to do is actually go use the banking system to basically pay for that funeral. So that's obviously one huge area where the government had basically didn't even think about, well, what does this mean for the funeral sector? Another big issue that's come up that has come about is this issue of debanking. And so there's a whole host of legal businesses in Australia that the banks have said, we don't want to do business with you for all sorts of reasons. So it could be tattoo parlors. There's actually, I've heard of one case in Melbourne of a bullion dealer where the banks have said, we're not going to do business with you anymore. I've heard of cases of in terms of people who want to buy, who want to deal in terms of vaping shops. So basically, vaping is smoking a liquid form or a liquid substitute to nicotine that can help you get off in terms of smoking tobacco. I've heard of pubs. I've heard of all sorts of legal businesses where the banks say, for whatever reasons, moral, ethical, social media pressure, media reports, we don't want to do business with your industry. And so, if debanking continues in Australia, and you are in business, if you can't get access to a bank account, if you're not allowed to use FPOS machines or other electronic payment platforms, well, the question is, well, how do you do business? And if you bring this law in, a whole host of entrepreneurs are going to be basically put out of work, and their businesses will shut down because they just can't do business. I mean, you can't do cash, you can't use the banks. And it's basically impossible to be able to do business. So huge ramifications. The government has made a series of claims as to what they think this legislation will seek to achieve around tax evasion, around money laundering. A lot of these claims are bogus. A lot of these claims were found out to be false during the first round of public hearings that were held in December. So obviously we have some big news coming up in terms of what's happening over the next week, and I'll be playing a role in that, and we'll get to the big announcement soon. But the government does not have a strong basis to take our rights away with this proposed law. And I should say that, like you sort of said, a lot of our customers at As Good as Gold have been quite upset about this proposed law. And I know you and Brian have been speaking to some of our customers about this, and you may want to share a couple of thoughts about what our customers have been saying about this law over the last few months.
One of the things that concerns them, I believe, John, and maybe you could provide some light on this, is that if that law is instigated, and let's say the amount is 10,000, what is preventing our government from then reducing that figure from 10,000 to 5,000 to 2,000 to 1,000 to $500? And so then we've got a situation quite clearly where we were taught in my era as a very young man, a very young boy, I was taught that savings was a good habit. Saving money was a good habit. And we would go to school and we'd have a piggy bank, it was a miniature bank, and a little slot in the top where you'd put some coins and hand it over to the bank representative at school. And I'm sure some of our viewers, if they're in my age group, would remember that. So savings was supported. But today, it seems as though we're penalised. So that if we had a situation where we were looking at zero interest rates or negative interest rates, one can't get a return on their investment, their deposit in the bank. They take it out of their account and they're limited in the manner in which they can spend it. So that this has become hugely concerning because it's placing every Australian citizen in a very awkward position economically. So it's really impacting on their economic future and the way they transact business. No wonder they'd be concerned. What are your feelings there, John?
I was going to say, Darryl, so you asked me a specific question, what would stop the government from lowering the threshold?
Correct. That's a really important point.
Yeah. So the way the law is currently proposed before Parliament is if the government wanted to reduce the threshold from 10,000 to a lower amount, say 5,000, 2,000, etc., Parliament would have to pass a new law to change the law. So that you still would have to go through the parliamentary process. But one thing that we have seen when you see a severe economic crisis, and the GFC, as a classic symptom of this, is when people are fearful about the world coming to an end or the financial system collapsing, you will see governments push very extreme measures, and they will try to convince the public that we need to do this because we're in the midst of a crisis. So what I'm fearful of is they may say, hey, $10,000, it will affect some people, not too many. Let's just get this through. And then if the economic crisis that have been forecasting comes in and they want to lower the amount because they want to trap more people into the banking system, they're going to use some sort of what I would call fake or fallacious argument to basically convince people that to do this is basically in their interest, and they're going to use all their buddies in the mainstream media to help push this narrative. You mentioned negative interest rates. We had Aaron Patrick, who's a senior journalist at the Australian Financial Review, in 2019 write an article saying that Martin North and I are conspiracy theorists because we've made the link between this particular law and negative interest rates. Well, we've made that link and we didn't hide that link, but what do we base it on? We base this on of documents from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF and a whole bunch of other central bank forums have written in reports over the last few years that to make negative interest rates work, you have to eliminate cash, and this is what the whole war on cash is about. So, it's not a conspiracy theory; it's a conspiracy fact. And yet, the propaganda arm of the banks, which is the Financial Review, basically came after us in 2019. And so, the establishment have all sorts of friends and allies throughout this country, but also across the world. And they will leverage those propaganda avenues to convince the public that in the midst of a crisis, lowering the threshold will actually be good for Australia and Australians.
Yeah, they'd have a hard time convincing me. I've walked into so many venues, and I don't know if it's just me. Well, it can't be because there are other people in the same place. But I would walk in expecting to pay for the goods that I had received by credit card. But I noticed a whole lot of people standing around not knowing seemingly what to do. I asked the question, what's going on? And the answer was, all our systems are down. These people can only pay by credit card, so we can't take a payment at the moment. Well, I just put my hand in my pocket, pulled out a whole heap of cash. Not that I needed that much to purchase what I wanted at the time, but I just drew some cash out, made the payment and walked out, and everybody else was still left standing. So I see a lot of issues coming up. If you take cash out of the system, that's just one simple example, but I'm sure, have you come across that, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was a story I'll tell in a minute.
So what do you do? What do you do in that environment? Nothing's, no. You've got to have an option.
You're dead in the water, Darryl.
You've got to have an option.
Yeah.
Well, let's share your story.
Okay, well, as everybody knows around the world, Australia's been suffering from bushfires, and in many different states, which we have 6 of them. And the bottom line is that Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, we all suffered the same thing. But one of the stories was, and it was prevalent on a number of issues, is the fact that the people that are trying to get away from where the central fires were coming from, it was in the country, the mountainous area, especially in New South Wales, Victoria, and they had to fill up with petrol, and the ATMs were down. ATMs were down, couldn't get cash out, couldn't use the ATM, so all sorts of problems, and people were stuck. We had people sitting sleeping on the beaches for about 3 days, 4 days to try to escape. There was just no escape because they didn't have any petrol in their car, and they couldn't go to an ATM and couldn't fill up. That's massive dramas.
And so it goes on. So major ramifications from this, but quite clearly, the feedback that I'm getting is the government is trying to instigate plans and policies that remove make my economic future vulnerable. That's the message that's clearly coming across to us. Could you just share your opinion there?
So I definitely would agree with in terms of what you just said. So I mean, yeah, look, I mean, I think this law is a huge assault on freedom, and yeah, I mean, I've had numerous conversations with my daughter, and I mean, look, she's 5.5. I mean, look, she's got money in a money box, just like you had when you were a kid. And I said to her about a month ago, I said, the government wants to bring in a rule so that they'll tell you what to do with the money in your money box. What do you feel about that? And she basically said, I think that's bad, Dad. I mean, so I said to her, how does it make you feel? It says it makes me feel sad. So I mean, I'm 5.5 years old, but I mean, look, I mean, freedom is an instinctive feeling, whether you're a kid or whether you're sort of older, my age or your age. And one of the things I was saying to my daughter this morning was that. I mean, she doesn't appreciate that in parts of the world we don't have, they don't have the sort of freedoms we have here in Australia. And so one of the things I was trying to sort of say to her is that it's important that Australia remains free because that's what stands us apart from many other countries. And a lot of people around the world would love to have the types of freedoms we have in this country, and we've got to protect it, otherwise we lose it.
Correct. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go ahead with this question, John, I will say something that's rather humorous. From the first question, or the lead up to the first question, I saw Darryl writing down some notes, and at the same time I was writing down the notes because you were chatting away and certain figures came up. And I looked across at his notes, and they're exactly the same notes that I had written down. So great minds think alike. Not to say that I'm great, but great minds do think alike. I will make a point. What's next with this banned 10,000 plan? And I wrote down, do the same things and expecting different results. And I think it comes from Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. I mean, they drop it from 10,000, 8,000, 6,000. I mean, what are they going to do? Drop it so they can get enough for a cup of coffee, and that would be illegal. So I know that's an exaggeration, but how far and how low will they go, and will they get a different result? I don't think so. I'm going to move along to the next question. Look, presently, the law is currently being considered by the federal parliament. Can you please explain what has happened in parliament with this proposed law to date?
I think it was around September. The proposed law was introduced into Parliament in the House of Representatives. So where we're up to at the moment is it's passed the House of Representatives. It's been introduced into the Australian Senate. The Australian Senate has put together an inquiry in looking into this bill. The inquiry held so there was a call for submissions from September through to November, and there was 2,659 submissions that came through. Now that's a big number because typically with these sort of inquiries, they'll be lucky to get 50 submissions. So the bulk of at least 90 to 95% of the submissions come from the work that I've done with Martin North. We've had a lot of people watching our programs about this particular law. So the fact that a lot of people did put in a submission, a lot of them have sort of come on board because of the commentary we've done. But having said that, there have been other Australians across YouTube and the internet who have done a lot of good work to basically get the word out there. So that's what's happened there. So submissions closed halfway through November. Then they decided to have a first public hearing on the 12th of December 2019. There was a range of private sector organisations that testified against the legislation. There was only one private organisation that was in support of the bill. Funny enough, the Uniting Church of Australia, and everyone's wondering why is the church saying that they want to limit cash transactions when it really has nothing to do with what a church should be doing. But that's what happened. And then in the afternoon, a series of government witnesses from the Treasury, the RBA, in terms of Austrac, in terms of the Australian Taxation Office, they all sort of went to Parliament to testify. So that's basically what's happened there. Now we do have another hearing. So the next hearing is next week, the 30th of January, 2020. The hearing will be in Sydney at the Portside Centre, 207 Kent Street. So there will be an opportunity for people to attend the hearing. There's a public gallery, and the hearings will go from about 9 o'clock in the morning until about 3. Now, once that hearing is over, under the resolution in the Senate, the committee is required to hand down its inquiry report on the 7th of February, which is only a couple of weeks away. And once that report is handed down, what I think is going to happen, but I'm not entirely sure, is the government will bring this legislation to a vote probably the week commencing the 10th of February. So there have been some business groups who have asked the government to delay this legislation because they've said that certain businesses are just not ready to handle this new law if it does become the law. But it could well be that we're only about 2.5, 3 weeks away from this becoming the law. And I expect that if it's passed by the Senate, the Governor General will sign off and it will come into immediate effect. And if that were to happen, here's the thing. So you and Brian and I know about this law, but there's a lot of Australians out there who still have no idea that this is being proposed. So a lot of Australians will find a rude awakening if this becomes law in the next 3 weeks. This is such a threshold issue in terms of economic freedom, and we're literally only 2.5, 3 weeks away before we could be losing something very significant.
I noticed, there's so much involved in it. What came up in that little piece of information was the Uniting Church. I can't believe it that a body of this type would be for something like a cash ban, simply because if you read the Bible, First Testament, is that money is mentioned 2,000 times through to the First Testament, and gold and silver is mentioned 800 times. So I don't know what the United Church is really getting to. I can't believe that they would be for something like this. Anyway, Darryl?
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is, Brian's got to ask you about this big news that's coming out.
Well, yeah, look, we understand that you have some news. It's something that you've mentioned to us, and we obviously thought it important enough to do it on this show. Can you share with us, to our audience, what the news is?
The big announcement is that I have been asked by the Senate to testify in terms of next week. So at 10 a.m., 30th of January, I will be in front of a Senate committee presenting my evidence in terms of why I think that this law is a very egregious law, and will be, I get I'll have a half an hour. I get to make a 5-minute opening statement where I'll basically try to sum up my submission, but also to call out, because the government's made a series of claims as to why we need this law and what this law will achieve. And the claims the government have made, from what I can see, the claims don't stack up. So part of my opening statement will be to expose the holes in the government's arguments and to explain to people that, here's what I think the real agenda is and what the real implications are. So I get to do that for 5 minutes, and then I will get questions from the senators for 25 minutes, and this will be my opportunity to be able to answer whatever questions that come before me. But yeah, given that I've been very focused on this for the last 6 months, the opportunity to testify before Parliament, which is, it's funny. I mean, I've worked in Parliament for a senator before. I've had numerous meetings with politicians. So I've been around in this environment for many years, but this is actually my first time testifying in front of a parliamentary committee. So it's a new experience, and I'll be basically under oath and recorded by Hansard, and a lot of media journalists will be sort of very focused on what I have to say and the other witnesses have to say. But But yeah, no, look, I mean, I'm very excited and honoured with the opportunity to testify. And obviously, when we think about our industry, the precious metal industry, I think I'm the only one from our industry testifying to Parliament in terms of this law. And so why I think this is important is because a lot of Australians who are concerned about economic freedom, the ability to use their money, a lot of these people are buyers of gold. They are buyers of gold and silver, and so so I think that there's a lot of interest in the precious metals community. There's a lot of interest in the crypto community also in terms of this law. So the fact that so far, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't seen the full witness list for next week. I don't understand. I think that there's no one from the crypto community or the precious metal industry other than myself who's going to sort of speak in terms of this issue. So the fact that we actually have someone from our community, from our industry,
Absolutely,
to testify, I think that's quite important, and hopefully I try to make a robust case. Now, what I will say is that in terms of moving forward, So I mean, the one piece of bad news that I would have to share with the viewers is that I think the way I see the politics of it is perhaps more than likely that this will become law. So we know that the government will vote for it. What really comes down to in terms of this issue is how Labor will vote on the issue. We think that all the other key senators and parties in the Australian Senate will vote against. Labor has been very coy about what their intentions are, but some of the communication I've had in the last few days sort of gives me the feeling that Labor is more inclined to vote for this rather than to vote against it. So part of my role testifying next week is to, I want to obviously make the case as to why this is bad law, and obviously try to apply pressure on particularly the ALP in terms of why they should be voting that they should be voting against the legislation. So, we'll obviously. I think you've got a question for me about how can people help to oppose this law, but we'll get into that shortly.
Yeah, not a problem. The only thing that I would suggest here, John, is that you made a statement that you've got a 5-minute presentation, question and answers, and you're only allowed 30 minutes. I think it's a subject that you should be allowed 30 hours for, because it's such a big deal. It's a loss of freedoms. It's a loss of all forms of being able to do things the way you want to do them. And I'm not talking about carrying firearms here. We're talking about, a $10,000 transaction. I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, $10,000 was worth $100,000 in today's terms, right? $10,000 is not a lot of money, right? And they're talking about taking away your freedoms because you want to spend $10,000. I think, John, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's such a worthwhile thing to talk about. I'm very unhappy about the 30 minutes. But we will carry on.
So, John, firstly, I would like to say you need to be congratulated. This is a pretty big deal. And so, personally, I'd like to say congratulations on being the only man in Australia, really, that's speaking on this subject and testifying. And really, what we need to recognise here is that you are testifying and you are speaking for all of the people of Australia in real terms that want to be able to continue to live their life as they want to live it. So congratulations again, John, and we really look forward to seeing you take control of the situation in the next couple of weeks.
What I would say is that it is an honour to testify to Parliament, but I think we should put the congratulations on ice until we can successfully oppose the law and make sure that it doesn't pass Parliament. So if we can achieve that outcome, I'm ready to break out the champagne. But until then, let's keep working and seeing if we can engineer the right result.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
of
keep the
course.
champagne corked for the moment. Yeah. One question to follow up there, because I have an interest in politics, always have had, but I don't because through work and that my lifestyle, I haven't been able to listen to parliamentary commentators and what goes on in Parliament. So the question is, if people want to listen to your testimony, how can they tune in?
Because the public hearing is in Sydney, Parliament will have a live audio stream, so people can tune in via the parliamentary website. So the hearings will start at 9 o'clock. There'll be other witnesses, and I think there's probably like a 1 hour lunch break around 12 o'clock, and it will go throughout to about 3 in the afternoon. So people can look up the program when the program hasn't been released, but when it's released, they can look up to see who's testifying, and then if there's a particular person you want to listen to, me or someone else, then you can easily go on to the parliamentary website. You look up the Senate committees, and there'll be an option to listen to the hearing live. And for those around Australia or around the world who want to listen to it, they can. And obviously, when the first hearing took place in Canberra on the 12th of December, I was listening live from my home via my computer. And so people have that opportunity to be able to listen. And people, if people are listening and they hear things that are quite concerning, I recommend people take notes and try to send messages to various politicians and try to make the case for why this is bad.
Yeah, well, I was about to say that, we'd have a number of viewers at the moment that would be opposed to this proposed law. So we can't have you standing up and just taking the full responsibility for the rest of Australia. Our viewers and our subscribers have an opportunity here to, to make a decision and say, hey, we want to stand for what we really believe in here. So I was going to ask you, what can they do to get the best possible result? What can our viewing audience do if they're opposed to this proposed law? And they've only got a couple of weeks to do this. What can they do to influence the process in Parliament?
The only thing that I would suggest that people can do now is to, particularly with Labor senators, but also, any senators that they feel comfortable to contact, send emails, make phone calls, let the senators know that they oppose this proposed law, and that they expect that their senators to vote against this law when it comes to a vote that's likely to come up for a vote sometime in the next 3 weeks. One thing that I think Australians don't do, that they don't do often enough, is to basically give politicians some sort of ultimatum. And so it's something I've been telling people throughout 2019, and I would recommend people do it in 2020. If you feel as strongly as I do about this particular law, tell your senator, tell your MP that if this law becomes law, you will attempt to vote them out of office. You won't vote for them at the next election. So, with a lot of these politicians, that unfortunately is the only way to get the message through. A lot of these politicians, now just do what they're told to do. A lot of politicians don't read the laws that they pass, and they just take orders from the party bosses. And having been part of that system myself as an advisor, I've seen how this works behind the scenes. But the only way to really get the message through to politicians is to say, I will go to the ballot box and vote you out if you take my freedom away. And so a lot of Australians feel uncomfortable to be that confrontational. But I think with only 2.5 to 3 weeks to go, I think the time calls for that sort of direct approach.
Because there's a great deal riding on this for sure, and here's everyone's chance to stand up and do something about it. So, if I could, I'd like to, at that point, other than the fact that you may have some closing comments, John, if you had anything that you'd like to add to what you have already today, just in some closing comments.
One of the big points I'm going to make with my testimony next week, and it's something that you, Brian, and I have been speaking about throughout 2019, is going into 2020, throughout 2020 and 2021, as the economic crisis that we're all predicting, when it comes and when it unfolds, what I expect is going to happen is that the demand for cash is going to increase, not decrease. Now, one of the arguments by the Reserve Bank of Australia is that over the last decade, less Australians are using cash, more Australians are using electronic payments. Now, still about 37% of Australians still use cash on a regular basis, but the argument will be that that people are using less cash, therefore, not necessarily a big deal. Well, if negative interest rates do come forward in Australia, and my expectation is that they will, more Australians, particularly in the context of what Brian was talking about in terms of the bushfires, and people realising that if the banking system does collapse, or if you can't use your ATMs or your FPOS machines, you can't buy petrol, you can't pay for food, etc. I think there is a lot of Australians who are going to start hoarding more cash, and obviously hold on to that cash so they can use it when times are tough, whether it's large amounts or whether it is small amounts. So I think what I think Parliament is doing is passing a law now when cash is not necessarily a big concern. But if negative interest rates come in, just in 2016 when negative interest rates happened in Japan, everyone went out and bought safes, and everyone started going to Japanese banks and taking out yen and putting it in their safes because they didn't want to basically be impacted by the banks. So I think moving forward throughout this year, the demand for cash will go up, and so this law will be more of an issue going forward compared to now, and I think that's one of the key points that our viewers have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. John, thank you for that. Really appreciate your input as always. Very well prepared, and I think your information today exceptional. One other thing I would like to mention, though, you provide an enormous amount of information out there in the form of editorials. I know that you do interviews with ourselves and Martin North, but your editorials are just full of really good sound information that every Australian that is concerned at all about their economic futures should be reading. So at the moment, I know that you've a number of those editorials are listed on our website, but you also have a website, and you provide a lot of other information as well. Could you just very, very quickly confirm what it is that you could provide our viewers and subscribers on your website in the form of editorials and any other material that you may be able to provide?
My personal website is adamseconomics.com. So a lot of my whole body of work. It's on my website. It's free for anyone to access. One of the things that I've been trying to do over the last few years is obviously to ensure that I am held to account for my own conduct and in terms of my own words, is to basically put all of my analysis, all of my work for free publicly, so people can read it, people can scrutinize it, people can question whether I've got my logic wrong or whether I've got my facts, or if I'm making certain assertions, whether they can test to see whether I'm saying something that's sensible or whether it's crazy. And so over the Christmas break, I did lock myself away for a few weeks and wrote. I wrote quite a few editorials. I wrote a few things about silver, and we've got a video coming up about the silver market that people can have a read. I wrote quite a few articles about the in terms of the repo crisis that basically has been happening since September, and we'll have a few things to say about that hopefully in the next couple of weeks as well. I wrote an article about negative interest rates, and I did some sort of a bit of a deep dive, a deep dive research into that topic. I am working on a few other topics as well, over the next few weeks that I'll be publishing soon. But basically, starting from 2016, when I started on this journey of warning about this economic crisis, I've written a whole host of articles for the Daily Telegraph and news.com.au. I've written a whole bunch of articles for As Good as Gold Australia throughout 2018 and 19. And obviously here in 2020. So if people want to read my work about economics, about politics, culture, I've got other things on the website as well. It's adamseconomics.com. People can read. People can subscribe to my free newsletter. People can send me emails if they have additional questions about anything that I've said or written on the public record, and happy to stand by the work I've done.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, John. I know it's just fantastic material. Thank you once again. And thank you to our viewing audience and our subscribers. I mean, we just get fantastic feedback, don't we? From
We certainly do.
Every interview, we just get this downpour of good vibes from our subscribers.
Always being asked,
Yep.
when are John ourselves going to talk again?
Yeah.
They're looking for the next one.
Correct. So, look, so thank you to our viewers. And look, I guess until next time, then stay well, stay focused, and bye for now.
Bye for now.